Welcome back with a smiling face. Important note before starting: if you are a fan of audio stories, then our Patreon account is the best platform for you. Join us on Patreon for the best audiobooks ever. The Time of Awakening. Episode 5. Chapter 36 to 43. I gave Derek my jacket and he wore it without argument. It covered the blood spatter on his sweatshirt. As we left the bathroom, the people in the coffee shop finally noticed us, but only to call out that the bathroom was for paying customers only. The coffee shop had a post-winter clearance on promotional thermoses, emblazoned with their name, so Derek got one filled with hot chocolate, plus 2 paper cups. Add a half dozen donuts and we had dinner to go. We couldn't just waltz back to the bus station, though. Liam would still be hunting for us, maybe joined by Ramon. If they'd been following us earlier, they might know we'd gone to the bus stop and would wait for us there. So we stayed downwind or behind buildings, then waited a half block away until we saw the bus coming. There was no sign of the werewolves. I'm sure it helped that it was just a bus stop, not a terminal. If they'd followed our trail to the flower shop, they probably hadn't figured out that we'd been there to buy bus tickets. Yet it was only after we were on and the bus pulled away that I finally relaxed. I was on my second cup of chocolate when my eyelids started to droop. "You should get some sleep," Derek said. I stifled a yawn. "It won't be that long, will it?" "An hour and a half. Close to double that. We're on the milk run." "What?" "The route that hits all the little towns," he said. He took my empty cup. I shifted, trying to get comfortable. He balled up my discarded sweatshirt and put it against his shoulder. "Go on," he said. "I don't bite. And from what I hear, that's a good thing." He gave a rumbling chuckle. "Yeah, it is." I leaned against his shoulder. "In a few hours, you'll be in a bed," he said. "Bet that's a good thing, hey?" Had anything so simple ever sounded so amazing? But as I thought of it, my smile faded and I lifted my head. What if Andrew isn't there? Or he didn't take them in? Then we'll find Simon and we'll splurge on a cheap motel. We are getting a bed tonight. Guaranteed. And a bathroom. He chuckled again. "Yeah, and a bathroom. Thank God." I laid my head on the sweatshirt pillow again. "What are you looking forward to?" "Food." I laughed. "I bet. Hot food. That's what I want. And a shower. I really want a shower." "Well, you'll have to fight me for it. If that guy could smell my hair color, I didn't do a very good job of rinsing it out. Which may explain why it feels so gross." "About that. The color. I didn't mean." "I know. You just picked something that would make me look different." And it did. "Yeah, but it looks fake. Even those guys could tell." "Wash it out, and we'll get some of that red stuff you like." I closed my eyes. As I drifted off, Derek started humming, so softly I could barely hear it. I lifted my head. "Sorry," he said. "I've got this stupid tune stuck in my head. No idea what it is." I sang a few bars of Daydream Believer. Yeah," he said. "How'd? My fault. My mom used to sing it to me when I couldn't sleep, so I was singing it last night. It's the Monkees, the world's first boy band." I glanced up at him. "And I've just lost any scrap of cool I ever possessed, haven't I? At least you're not the one still singing it." I smiled, rested my head against his shoulder, and fell asleep to his soft off-tune humming. We got off at one of those small milk run stops. When Simon said Andrew lived outside New York City, I figured he meant in the Hudson Valley or Long Island, but the bus dropped us in a town whose name I didn't recognize. Derek said it was about 30 miles from the city and about a mile from Andrew's place. Maybe it was because we knew the house was close, but that mile seemed to pass in minutes. We talked and joked and goofed around. A week ago, if someone had told me Derek could joke or goof around, I wouldn't have believed it. But he was at ease now, stoked even, with our destination so near. "It's just up there," he said. We were on a narrow road lined with trees. It wasn't really farm country. More like a rural community, with houses set way back from the road, hidden behind fences and walls and evergreens. As I squinted, Derek pointed. "See the old-fashioned gas lamps at the end of that drive? They're on, too, which is a good sign." We turned into the driveway as winding and treed as the road, and seemingly just as long. Eventually we rounded a corner and the house came into sight. It was a cute little cottage, like something you'd see in an old English town, with stone walls and ivy and gardens that I'm sure would be beautiful in a month or two. Right now the most beautiful part was the light blazing from a front window. "They're here," I said. "Someone's here," Derek corrected. When I hurried forward, he caught my arm. I looked back to see him scanning the house, his nostrils flaring. He tilted his head and frowned. "What do you hear?" I asked. "Nothing." He turned to survey the dark woods surrounding the house. "It's too quiet." "Simon and Tori are probably asleep," I said, but I lowered my voice and glanced about, his anxiety contagious. When we reached the cobblestoned walk, Derek dropped into a crouch. He lowered his head a foot from the ground. I wanted to tell him to come on, just knock on the door and we'd know whether they were here, stop being so paranoid. But I'd learned that what I would have once considered paranoia was, in this new life, sensible caution. After a moment, he nodded and some of the tension went out of the set of his shoulders as he pushed to his feet. "Simon's here?" I asked. "And Tori?" He took one last slow look around, almost reluctantly, like he wanted to race to the front door as much as I did. Then we continued along the walk, the stones squeaking beneath our wet sneakers. Derek was so busy looking out at the forest that I was the one who had to grab his arm this time. I pulled him short and directed his attention to our path. The front door was ajar. Derek swore. Then he took a deep breath, as if fighting off the first twitches of panic. He motioned for me to get behind him, then seemed to think better of it and waved for me to stand beside the door, against the wall. When I was out of the way, he prodded the door open an inch. Then another. A third tap and he caught a smell, nostrils flaring. His eyebrows gathered in confusion. After a moment, I smelled it, too. A strong bitter smell, familiar, coffee. I mouthed. He nodded. That's what it was, burned coffee. He eased the door open wider. I pressed my back against the wall, resisting the urge to sneak a peek. I watched him instead as his gaze scanned the room beyond, his expression telling me nothing immediately caught his attention. He motioned for me to stay put and stepped inside. Now I really fidgeted, tapping my thighs, scrunching my toes in my shoes, heart tripping. I wished I was the kind of girl who always carried a compact mirror. I could use it like they do in spy movies, to see what was happening around the corner. When I leaned a little too close to the doorway, my inner voice piped up, telling me not to be stupid. The guy with bionic senses was better equipped for this. Finally Derek backed out. He started to pantomime that he'd go in and look around while I stayed out here. Then, after a glance at the surrounding darkness, he seemed to think better of his first instinct. He pointed to my pocket and mimicked opening a switchblade. I took it out. He gestured for me to stay behind him, his emphatic jabs and accompanying scowl saying better than any words, "I mean it, Chloe." I nodded. We went inside. The front door led into a small foyer with a closet, then opened into the living room. A few pieces of mail were scattered in front of the closet door. I thought maybe it had been shoved through a mail slot, but there wasn't one, and I remembered seeing a mailbox at the end of the long drive. A small table leaned precariously against the corner, and a piece of ad mail rested on top of it. Derek was moving into the living room. I hurried to catch up before I got the look. It was small and cozy, like you'd expect in a country cottage. The chairs and sofa were piled with mismatched pillows. Hand-knitted blankets were neatly folded over each back. The tops of the end tables were clear, but the shelves underneath bulged with magazines, and the two bookshelves were overflowing. One blazing lamp was the only electrical appliance. There was no TV, computer, or other techno-gadget to be seen. An old-fashioned sitting room, for lighting the fire and curling up with a book. Derek headed for the next doorway. When the floorboards creaked, he stopped short and I nearly plowed into him. He cocked his head. The house was silent. Eerily still and silent. Even if everyone had gone to bed, it shouldn't be so quiet, considering both Simon and Tori snored. We stepped into the kitchen. The stink of burned coffee was gag-inducing. I could see the coffee maker on the counter, the red light still on, a half-inch of sludge in the bottom, like a full pot of coffee had been simmering for at least a day. Derek walked over and turned it off. There was a plate on the counter. On it was a piece of toast with one bite gone. An open jam jar rested beside it, the knife still inside. A coffee mug sat on the table, on top of an opened newspaper. I looked in the cup. It was 2/3 full, the cream congealing in an oily white film. Derek waved for me to fall behind him again and he headed for the back of the house. 37. Teehee house was bigger than it looked, with 4 doors off the rear hall. The first led to a guest room, the bed covers pulled tight, towels folded on top of the dresser, no sign that anyone had used it recently. The next was an office with a futon couch, more room for guests, but again, no sign that any had been here in a while. Across the hall was a bathroom. It, too, looked unused, with wrapped soap and unopened shampoo on the counter, ready for guests. At the end of the hall was the master bedroom. It was as tidy as the rest of the house, but the bed was unmade. A bathrobe lay crumpled on a chair. On one nightstand sat a half-filled glass of water and a paperback novel. There was an attached bathroom, with a rumpled bath mat and a towel draped over the shower stall. I squeezed the towel. Dry. Back in the hall, Derek dropped again to sniff. They were here, he said. Simon and Tori. He nodded. They didn't sleep here last night, though, I said. No one's used this room in a while. He nodded again. Can you smell anyone else? I asked. Just Andrew. I'll check the front again. He walked off, apparently having decided that the house was empty, so it was safe to leave me behind. I met up with him back in the kitchen as I examined the toast. He bent to sniff it. Andrew? I asked. He nodded. I walked to the table and looked at the newspaper. It's like he was reading this, drinking his coffee, and waiting for the toast to pop. He puts jam on it, takes a bite and then... And then what? That was the question. I picked up the coffee pot. It's been on since at least this morning. He walked over and eyed the pot. Rings show it was almost full. To evaporate that much, it's been on since yesterday. Before Simon and Tori arrived. Derek didn't answer. He was staring out the window over the sink, his gaze blank. "Is this, like your dad?" I asked. When he disappeared. He nodded. Were there any other scents at the door? He turned slowly then, his attention shifting back to me. "Yeah, but there are lots of reasons why someone would come to the door. None seem to go past it. No recent trails, at least. The table in the front hall looks like someone bumped into it and the mail fell off. From the looks of this place, Andrew doesn't seem the type to leave a mess like that." "No, he's not. Something happened at the door, then. Someone came or someone called and Andrew left in a hurry. Like their dad." I didn't say it again, I already knew he was thinking it. I circled the kitchen, looking for more clues. Everything was so neat that any disruption would stick out, and I couldn't see any. "It's definitely breakfast for one," I said. "And there's no sign that Simon or Tori used the spare bedrooms or guest bath. That would suggest that whatever happened here, it happened before they arrived." Derek nodded, like he'd already come to this conclusion. I opened cupboards, all perfectly ordered inside. It seems like Simon did exactly what we did: came in, walked around, realized something had happened and then. "And then what?" That question again. "If they left, there'll be a second trail outside," Derek said as he strode to the kitchen door. "I'll see if they went back to the road or maybe this will help." I snatched a drawing hung among the bills and notes on the fridge. "This is Simon's work, isn't it?" It wasn't as obvious as the message he'd left in the warehouse. A comic book character would stand out too much on Andrew's fridge. Simon trusted Derek to recognize his work even when it was a simple sketch. "Yeah, it's his. It's someone swimming. I have no idea what it means but—" "Pool house," Derek called back, already striding toward the rear of the house. I scrambled after him, but by the time I reached the door, it was already shutting. I stepped out into the pitch-black yard, huge trees closing in on all sides, blocking the moonlight. Derek popped from the shadows, making me yelp. He waved me back inside and shut the door. "He's not there," I said. "Running outside might not be such a smart idea." He took the picture again and studied it, like he was looking for any clue that Simon hadn't drawn it willingly. "Front door," he said. "We'll go the long way. Sneak up." With an impatient wave for me to stay close, he started off. I took out my switchblade again and followed. It was a slow trip to the pool house. Derek stopped every few feet to look, listen, and sniff. It was too dark for me to do anything except stay as close as I could. With his dark clothing and quiet walk, that wasn't easy, and every so often I had to reach out and brush the back of his jacket to reassure myself he was still in front of me. Finally we could see a clearing ahead and, in it, a pale building. Then came a shrill whistle. "Simon," Derek said. He broke into a jog, leaving me scrambling after him. Before he reached the door, it clicked open. "Hey, bro," Simon whispered. He thumped Derek's back, the nylon jacket crinkling. "Where's Chloe?" Right behind Derek turned and saw me stumbling along. "Sorry. Forgot not everyone has your night vision." Simon thumped him again and strode past, greeting me with a one-armed hug and a whispered, "Good to see you." He squeezed my upper arm, then started to say something before Derek cut him off with a hissed, "Inside." We stepped through the door into the glow of a lantern. Noticing that, Derek looked around sharply. "Relax," Simon said. "No windows. You didn't notice the light, did you?" Derek grunted and walked farther in. As he'd said, it was a pool house, filled with neatly stacked and organized pool and yard supplies. Simon and Tori had set up 2 lawn chairs. Wrappers and Diet Coke cans covered a nearby tabletop. I glanced around for Tori and found her asleep on an inflated raft. "The longer she sleeps, the better," Simon said. "It's a good thing you two showed up because another day alone with her." He pantomimed throttling. "I saw that," said a sleepy voice. Tori lifted her head. "Believe me, the feeling is mutual." She sat up and raked her hair back, stifling a yawn. "There's nothing like spending a whole day alone with a guy to make a girl say, 'What was I thinking?'" "At least one good thing came of it," Simon murmured. Tori looked at me. "He left me here. Alone. Unarmed. At the mercy of whoever took his dad's friend. First, from what I hear of your spells, you're a hell of a lot better armed than I am," Simon said. "Second. Left you? Excuse me? You refused to come along. Because I didn't see the point. Why go racing off looking for the bad guys? I'm sure if we stick around here, they'll find us soon enough. The smart thing to do would have been to get as far from this place as possible. But no, poor Derek and Chloe might not find us. Hello." She waved at Derek. "Human bloodhound. He'll find us." Simon leaned down to me and whispered, "It was fun." And then Tori continued. I cut in, and then we remembered that we called a moratorium on bickering, and if we have any issues to discuss, we should wait until we're someplace safe. "We need to discuss a game plan, too," Derek said, "in case this happens again. Right now, the important thing is Andrew." He turned to Simon. "What did you find when you got here?" "Exactly what we had," as Simon explained. "The front door had been ajar, and they'd left it that way to warn us to enter with caution. They'd walked through the house, and when Simon realized it looked like when his dad had vanished, they got out of there quickly. Simon left the note, and found the keys, and they retreated to the pool house." "Do you have the keys?" Derek asked. Simon handed them to him. Derek flipped through. "Looks like a full set. Is the car still in the garage?" Simon swore under his breath. "Totally forgot to check. We'll look, but I'll bet it is." "Car?" Tori walked over. "We have a car." "No, we do not," Derek began. "You're 16, right?" Tori said. "I turned 16 2 months ago, locked up in Lyle House, meaning I don't have a license, and even if I did." "But you can drive, right?" she said. "You look old enough that no cop would pull you over as long as you keep to the speed limit, don't run a yellow." "I'm not stealing a car from a guy who has disappeared and may be reported missing at any moment. My only point about the car was that if it's still here, Andrew didn't drive off. Someone took him. We just don't know whether it was with his permission. So what are we going to do? Presume he was kidnapped and get as far from here as we can, in case they come back." Tori turned to Simon. "See? We can get some sleep, then we're taking my advice." "I mean right now," Derek said. He was right. The sooner we left, the better, but I couldn't help feeling my shoulders slump at the thought of hitting the road again. Walking again. Eating energy bars and sleeping in alleys again. I tried not to picture the house, warm and cozy, with beds, food, showers. Feeling Derek's gaze on me, I straightened. "I'm good." "Of course she is," Tori said. "Are perky little this time," she cut herself off. "Okay, sorry, but you know what I mean, guys. As long as Chloe can walk, she's not going to admit she needs to rest. I slept on the bus. For about an hour, Derek said. And none last night? What happened last? Simon stopped. Later, I know. But Tori has a point. Chloe needs to rest and she's not the only one. We're beat. It's already late. If we can rest here safely, we should all recharge our batteries. Otherwise they're going to quit when we need them most. I could tell Derek wanted us to move out, but after a moment's consideration, he waved us to the door. We're up at dawn, gone a half hour later. If you aren't ready, you stay behind. Any light that isn't on, leave it off. Stay away from all the windows. 38. We all showered. Having 2 bathrooms made that quick. While I was waiting, I tried to tie a knot in my necklace chain. I didn't like keeping the pendant in my pocket. When that didn't work, I looked for string and instead found a piece of ribbon and tied it on that. After the showers, we ate. Andrew had a lot of convenience food. His housekeeping skills didn't seem to extend to cooking. We found decent frozen meals, cooked them in the microwave, and they tasted so good, better than any gourmet dinner. Simon organized our watch shifts as we ate. Derek insisted on taking the first, and the rest of us headed to bed, with Tori and me sharing the spare room and Simon on the office futon. No one felt right sleeping in Andrew's bed. I made a bathroom stop first. When I came out, I saw the photos along the hall, and stopped at a shot of Simon and Derek. Maybe 12, they were roasting marshmallows over a campfire. Simon looked like Simon, with his spiked dark blonde hair and big grin as he showed off his flaming marshmallow for the camera. Derek looked different. The picture had been taken before puberty hit. His skin was clear and he had a shock of black hair, still falling into his eyes. He was taller than Simon, but not as much, and he was thinner. He hadn't started filling out yet. He still wasn't magazine cover material, but he was the kind of guy that, at that age myself, I might have stolen a glance at across the classroom and thought he was kind of cute, with really nice eyes. That was taken out back here. I jumped. Simon laughed and shook his head. Yes, I said. I'm still jumpy. So this was here. I pointed at the picture. He nodded. The summer before Dad and Andrew had their fight, I think. There's a clearing where Derek and I camped out. He paused, thinking. I wonder if Andrew kept all that gear. I'm sure Tori isn't the backpacking type, but if it means no more sleeping in rat-infested buildings, she'll go for it. I'll talk Derek into giving us time to look for the camping gear tomorrow. I know you're exhausted, so I won't keep you up chatting, but you will tell me about the adventures I missed this time. I managed a tired smile. Sure. I started to turn away, then stopped. You've got your watch alarm set, right? You'll get me up after your shift. I doubt either of us will be taking a turn. Derek only let me organize shifts because he wasn't in the mood to argue. I'll go out at 3, but he won't give up his post. He needs sleep, too. Agreed, and I will hassle him. But he doesn't like us being here and there's no way he'll let someone without superhero strength and senses stand guard. The best thing we can do is find those tents and sleeping bags in the morning, get him to the nearest campsite, and let him sleep then. I got a few steps away before he said, Chloe. I turned. The hall was dark, lit only by the living room light behind him, throwing his face into shadow. Was Derek okay with you today? I know he was getting up in your face before we left Buffalo and I was worried. You guys seem fine now. We are. When he said nothing, I said, really? We got along great, actually. A nice change. I couldn't see his expression, but could feel his gaze on me, then he said softly, "Good." A pause and a more emphatic, "That's good. I'll see you tomorrow then. We'll talk." We headed for the bedrooms. Once again, sleep and I weren't on speaking terms. My brain was too busy playing in the land of nightmares. I kept thinking of the woods surrounding the house. I'd hear a branch scrape the window and leap up, certain it was a bat and, of course, then start thinking of zombie bats, trapped in their crushed bodies. After a Disney-fied dream of prancing through the forest, leading a singing trail of undead critters, I bolted awake, sweating, and decided it was time to give up the ghost, so to speak. I got out of bed and checked the clock. It was almost 5, meaning Simon had been right about Derek not letting us take a turn. I got up, grabbed a coat from the front closet, and headed for the kitchen. "Chloe," Derek's growl vibrated from the forest long before I could see him. "I told Simon I want you guys to sleep." He stopped as the smell of sausages drifted his way. I could imagine him sniffing the air, stomach rumbling, and I tried not to laugh. I found him sitting on the grass in a clearing. I held out a lawn chair and a plate of sausages and buns. "I know you won't come in, so you might as well be comfortable. Unless you aren't hungry." He took the sausages. I pulled a bottle of Coke from my pocket, then shucked the coat and passed them over. "You should be sleeping," he said. "I can't." "Sure you can. Just close your eyes and," he studied me, then grunted, "What's up?" I looked out over the forest. The air smelled very faintly of wood smoke, reminding me of the photo. "I saw a picture of you and Simon. He said you guys had a camping spot out here. Is this it? So we're changing the subject." He shook his head, set up the chair, sat, and looked at me expectantly for a moment. "Yeah. This is the spot. It smells like someone else had a campfire going earlier tonight. Someone burning leaves? Or kids getting a jump start on summer. So we're definitely changing the subject." I paused, then lowered myself to the grass. "It's just, this." I waved at the forest. "I'm worried that I'm going to, in my sleep. Raise another corpse." I nodded. "That's why you couldn't sleep last night, isn't it?" I thought about that later, on the bus. "You were afraid she was buried out there, the girl you saw get killed." I nodded. "I was worried that if I drifted off, I'd keep thinking about her, about summoning her, like with the homeless guy. I can't control my dreams. And I figured there was a good chance she was buried out there, never found. So if you did raise her, and we left her body there to be found, that wouldn't be such a bad thing, would it? Maybe, if I knew I could safely raise her and release her quickly. But what if she didn't dig her way out and I never realized I'd raised her and..." I turned to look into the forest again. "I'll get you a chair, too," he said. I protested that I wasn't staying, but he just kept going. When he returned, he came around the other way. "I circled the house," he said. "If there was a body on the property, I would have smelled it. The wind's good tonight. You're safe." It's not just people I'm worried about." I finally told him about raising the bats in the warehouse. "I didn't summon them," I said. "I didn't even know I could do that with animals, that they had a soul, ghost, spirit, whatever. If I go to sleep and dream of any kind of summoning, there's got to be a dead animal somewhere nearby. I could raise it and never know. I'd just walk away and leave it trapped in its corpse." For I took a deep breath. "Okay, I'm freaking out, I know. You've got a reason to. It's not like I'd do it intentionally, and maybe that should make a difference, but it's still not something you want to do. I nodded. He took a gulp of the Coke, then capped it, stuck it into his pocket, and stood. Let's go. Where? I'll hear anyone who comes near the property. So there's no need to sit here doing nothing. We might as well hunt up some dead animals for you. I scowled. That's not funny. I'm not being funny, Chloe. You're worried because you don't understand why it's happening and how it works and how to stop it. We can experiment and get some answers. It's not like either of us has anything better to do for the next couple of hours. 39. Derek crouched beside a flat, matted creature that had once scampered through the forest and now looked like it had been run over with a steamroller. I tapped it with my toe. I was thinking of something with more remaining body parts, he said. With more recognizable features, so I'll know what I'm summoning. But, yes, more remaining body parts would help, too. That was a mole. I think there's a rabbit over there somewhere. You can smell everything, can't you? That's cool. He looked at me, brows lifted. Being able to find decomposing animals is cool. Well, it's a unique talent. One that will get me far in life. Hey, someone has to find and clear away the roadkill. I bet it pays well. Not well enough. He stood and inhaled, then walked a few more feet, stooped, and prodded a chunk of rabbit fur. I'm definitely thinking something with more body parts, I said. Like a head. He gave a snort of a laugh. It's probably around here somewhere, but I suppose you want the parts attached, too. He paused. I wonder what would happen if. Keep wondering, because that's one experiment I'm not conducting. We'll find something. He walked a few more feet, then stopped again, shoulders going rigid as he surveyed the forest. I moved closer and whispered, Derek. Another slow scan of the woods, then he shook his head and resumed walking. What was it? I asked. Voices, but they're far off. Probably whoever had that campfire. Despite the dismissal, he slowed every few steps to listen. Are you sure it's okay? I asked. Yeah. Should I be quiet? We're fine. After another few strides, I cleared my throat. About the other night. When I said I didn't know that having a dead body around was a problem. Well, obviously, it happened after the bad thing, so. I waited for him to fill in the blank, but he kept walking. I knew it was a problem, I went on. I knew I should say so. I just didn't want to overreact, I guess. When I raised that man, I wanted to admit it, about the bats, but you didn't need me telling you you'd done something stupid when you already knew it. He pulled back a low branch for us. Yeah, you need to be more careful. We all do. But you don't need me making it worse by getting on your case. I know that. He looked at me for a moment, then his nostrils flared and his face lifted to catch the breeze. He waved for us to turn left. And about me not figuring out I was ready to start changing? I lied. With the itching and the fever and the muscle spasms, I knew that's what it had to mean. I just, same as you, I didn't want to overreact and freak out Simon. I figured I could handle it. We all need to be careful. Especially now, knowing what they did, I trailed off, feeling the now familiar bubble of rising panic, that part of me that couldn't stop reading those words. Genetic modification. Uncontrollable powers. How bad it would get, how far it would go, how. Chloe. I bumped into his arm and saw that he'd stopped, and was looking down at me. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice soft. "We'll handle it." I glanced away. I was shaking so hard my teeth chattered. Derek put his fingers on my chin and turned me to face him again. "It's okay," he said. He looked down at me, fingers still on my chin, face over mine. Then he let his hand fall and turned away with a gruff, "There's something over here." It took me a moment to follow. When I did, I found him crouched beside a dead bird. "Is this better?" he asked. I bent. The corpse looked so normal that it seemed to be only sleeping. My conscience could live with temporarily returning the spirit to this body. I started to kneel, then leaped up. "It's not dead." "Sure it is." He nudged it with his toe. "No, it's move." A maggot crawled from under the bird's wing and I stumbled back. "Could we get one without hitchhikers?" Derek shook his head. "Either it's going to be like this, with maggots, or too decomposed for maggots." He bent to peer at it. "They're first-stage blowfly larvae, meaning the bird hasn't been dead more than." His cheeks flushed and his voice lowered another octave. "And that's more than you need to know, isn't it?" "Right, you did a science fair project on this, didn't you?" When he looked up sharply, I said, "Simon told me about it when I was checking out that corpse in the abandoned building. He said not to mention it to you, though, because you only came in second." He grunted. "Yeah. I'm not saying mine was the best, but it was better than the winners, some eco-fuel crap." He paused. "That's not what I meant. There's nothing wrong with stuff like that, but the kid used junk science. Got the environmental vote. I won the People's Choice Award, though. Because, apparently, people are more interested in checking out maggoty dead things than saving the environment." A short laugh. "Guess so. Back to this particular maggoty dead thing, I guess I should get to work, trying to make it undead." I knelt beside it. "We'll start with," Derek began. He stopped when I opened my eyes. "Shut up, right," he said. "I was going to make some suggestions for a testing regimen, but I guess you can do that." Having only the faintest clue what a testing regimen is, I'll save myself the embarrassment and graciously turn that part over to you. When it comes to the summoning, though. Shut up and let you work." He sat cross-legged. "You said with the bats, you were summoning a ghost you couldn't see. So it was kind of a general summoning. You should start by doing a specific one. That'll tell us whether you still raise a nearby animal if you're trying to raise a specific person." "Got it. I'll try, Liz." I figured if we were being all scientific about this, I should use some kind of control measures. I'd start with the lowest power setting, just mentally saying, "Hey, Liz, are you there?" I did that, then checked the bird. No response. I pictured Liz and called again. Nothing. I imagined pulling Liz through. Nothing. I tried harder, still clearly focusing on her image. I kept checking the bird and kept looking, hoping for any sign of Liz herself. "How hard should I try?" I asked. "As hard as you can." I thought of what the demi-demon had said about raising zombies in a cemetery 2 miles away. I was sure she'd been exaggerating. And yet, "Try as hard as you're comfortable with," Derek said when I hesitated. "We can always do more another time." I ramped it up a little. Then a little more. I was closing my eyes after checking the bird again when Derek said, "Stop." My eyes flew open. The bird's wing was twitching. I stood and moved toward it. "It could just be the maggots," he said. "Hold on." He got up, took a branch and was reaching it toward the bird when his chin shot up. His eyes narrowed, and his nostrils flared. Tr! A distant crack cut me off. He lunged and hit me in a football tackle. I toppled over. Something stung my upper arm right above the bandages, then whizzed past as we dropped. It hit the ground behind us with a thwack and a geyser of dirt. Derek quickly lifted off me, but stayed over me, like a shield, or more likely making sure I didn't jump up. He glanced over his shoulder. "You okay?" he asked. As he turned to me, his nostrils flared again. "You're hurt." He plucked my sleeve. There was a hole clear through a fold in it. "I think they shot a dart," I said. "It grazed me. It landed over." He'd already found the spot. What he dug out, though, wasn't a tranquilizer dart. 40. As Derek held up the bullet, my heart slammed against my chest. I took a deep breath and pushed aside thoughts of the Edison group. "Are we on Andrew's property?" I asked. He nodded. "But it could still be hunters." Another nod. He shifted off me and surveyed the forest. All was quiet. "Crawl that way," he whispered, into the thicker bushes. "I'll get closer and take a look." The long grass at our feet erupted. Derek threw himself over me again with a whispered "Stay down," like I had a choice, with the 200-pound guy over me. A horrible squawking echoed through the forest, and we looked down to see the dead bird on its feet, wings drumming the ground. I'll point out, with some satisfaction, that I wasn't the only one who jumped. Derek scrambled off me. "Release." "I know." I crawled to the other side of the clearing, far enough that I didn't need to worry about the bird trying to jump on me. "Hear that?" a voice called between the bird's cries. As the bird screamed, I concentrated on releasing its spirit, but all I could think was "Shut it up! Shut it up!" Another crack. We both hit the ground. A bullet zoomed over our heads, hitting a tree trunk in a rain of bark. Still lying on my stomach, I closed my eyes. Derek grabbed my arm. "I'm trying," I said. "Just give me." "Forget it. Come on." He propelled me forward, hunched over, moving fast. Behind us, the bird continued to scream, covering the sound of our retreat. When it stopped, we did. I could hear something thrashing in the undergrowth, the bird or our pursuers, I couldn't tell. After a moment, the bird started again, its cries taking on an edge of panic that made my skin crawl. I closed my eyes to release it. "Not yet," Derek said. He led me farther, until we found a cluster of bushes. We managed to get into the middle of them and hunkered down. The bird's cries subsided, but I could hear it moving. "What the?" It was a man's voice, cut off by a pft that anyone who watches crime movies recognizes as the sound of a silenced gun. I was pretty sure they didn't make silencers for hunting rifles, and that hunters didn't carry sidearms. The bird's cries got louder. And the man's curses got louder still. A couple more silenced shots, then a crack, like he'd tried the rifle, too. The bird's screams turned to an awful gurgling. "Jesus, what is that thing?" I practically blew its head off and it's still alive. Another man answered with a harsh laugh. "Well, I guess that answers our question, doesn't it? The Saunders girl found those boys." I glanced at Derek, but his gaze was fixed straight ahead, in the direction of the voice. I closed my eyes and focused on the bird. After a moment, those pathetic sounds finally stopped. When another squawk came, I squeezed my eyes shut, certain it meant I hadn't released the bird's spirit after all. But it was only a radio. Derek strained to listen. I couldn't catch most of what was said, just enough to confirm that these men were indeed an Edison Group security team. They'd found us. And they weren't bothering with tranquilizer darts anymore. Why would they? We were dangerous experimental subjects who'd escaped twice. Now they didn't need an excuse to do what they'd have been happy to do all along, abandon rehabilitation and remove us from their study. The only one who might have fought to keep me alive was Aunt Lauren, a traitor. Easier to kill us here and bury the bodies, far from Buffalo. Simon! I hissed. We need to warn him and... I know. The house is through there. We'll circle. But we can't go back to the house. That's the first place they'll go, if they aren't there already. His eyes dipped away, his jaw setting. I guess we have to try, don't we? I said. Okay, if we're careful. No, you're right, he said. I'll go. You wait here. I grabbed the back of his coat as he crawled forward. You can't. I need to warn Simon. I'll come. No, you stay here. He started turning, then stopped. Better yet, get farther away. There's a road about a half-mile north. He pointed. You can't miss it. It's an easy walk. Simon and I used to do it all the time. When I give the signal, take off. Get to the road and hide. I'll find you there. He started walking away. I wanted to argue, but knew there was no use. Nothing would stop him from going back for Simon. And he was right not to want me along. I'd only be one more person to protect. Best to wait for his signal end. Derek's ear-splitting whistle cut through the night. Then he whistled again, and a third time, and I knew that's what he'd meant by signal, not just for me, but for Simon, trying to wake him up. It was loud enough to wake everyone up and to tell the whole security team exactly where. The thought stuttered in my head. Then I started cursing him, mentally calling him every name I could think of, including a few I didn't realize I knew. He knew his whistles would draw the attention of the entire Edison Group team. That's why he'd done it, rather than something subtle like throwing stones at Simon's window. He was drawing their attention to himself, giving Simon and me a chance to get away. I wanted to scream at him. Those men had guns. Real guns. And they weren't afraid to use them. If they did take his bait, he'll be fine. He gave you a chance to escape. Now use it. Move. I forced myself out of the bushes and set out at a slow, crouching jog, picking my way over open area and avoiding the noisy undergrowth. When I heard footsteps, I glanced around for cover and, seeing none, hit the ground. Two figures passed just 10 feet away. Both were dressed head to foot in camouflage, like army snipers. Even their hats had net screens covering their faces. A radio squealed, and a man's voice came over it. Beta team. One of the two, a woman by her voice, responded. The man continued. He's over here. Head in from the east and we'll surround. A rifle shot knocked my heart into my throat. The crash of undergrowth sounded over the radio. Did you get him? The woman asked. Not sure. That was Charlie team. Signing off. Get over here. Another shot. More distant crashing. I was sure my heart was pounding loud enough for the two to hear, but they kept going, heading for that distant racket. Heading for Derek. Beta, Charlie, I'd seen enough war movies to know that meant there were at least 3 pairs out here. 6 armed security agents. Enough to surround Derek and then. Just keep going. He'll find a way out. He's got superpowers, remember? None of which would help him against 6 trained professionals. none of which would stop a bullet. I waited until the two were gone, then I scanned the treetops. The last few summers at drama camp, we'd had survivor days. In most athletic challenges, I'd been a washout, but there'd been one where being small seemed to be an advantage, that and having a few old gymnastics trophies on my shelf. I raced to the nearest tree with low branches, grabbed one, and tested it. If Derek swung onto it, he'd crash back to the ground, but I was able to get up and onto the next, sturdier one with the branch giving no more than a faint groan of complaint. I kept climbing until I was confident that the canopy of new leaves hid me. Then I got into a secure position and whistled a thin, reedy screech that would have Derek rolling his eyes. What makes you think they're even going to hear that? I whistled again. And even if they do, why bother with you? They know where Derek is. They'll stick with him. The distant tramp of boots from the departing pair stopped. A murmur of voices. Then the footsteps returned my way. Now what are you going to do? You'd better have a plan or... I shushed the inner voice and gave another, softer whistle, just to be sure they heard me. The radio crackled. Alpha? This is Beta. We think we heard the Saunders girl. She's trying to contact Souza. Do you have him yet? I strained to hear the reply but couldn't make it out. We'll swing by and help as soon as we have her. Meaning they didn't have Derek. Or they have him, they just need help controlling him. The radio sounded again, another transmission I couldn't make out. The woman signed off, then said to her partner, "They want you to go back and help with the boy. I can handle the Saunders girl." Well, that didn't work out so well, did it? The man took off. I held still as the woman began searching for me. She passed my tree by at least a dozen feet and kept going. I waited until I was sure she wasn't going to return on her own, then knocked my foot against the tree trunk. She turned. For a moment, she just stood there, shining her flashlight beam in a full circle. I prepared to knock again, if she walked away, but she headed toward me, moving slowly, beam skimming the ground, pausing at every bush or clump of tall grass. When she walked under my tree, I tightened my hold and flattened myself against the branch. As I moved the foot I'd kicked with, it brushed the tree trunk. A chunk of bark fell at the woman's feet. She shone the beam down at it. "Please, don't. Please, please." The flashlight beam swung up into the branches. I dropped. I didn't think about the stupidity of dropping onto an armed woman probably twice my size. I just let go and rolled off the branch, that inner voice screaming, "What are you doing?" in far less polite language. I hit the woman. We both went down, her cushioning my fall. I leaped up, ignoring the squeaks of protest from my jolted body. I yanked out my knife end. The woman lay at the foot of the tree, her head a few inches from it. She had a net veil hanging from her hat, but through it I could see that her eyes were closed, and her mouth lolled open. She must have hit the trunk and been knocked out. I resisted the urge to check, grabbed her radio, and spun, searching for the gun. It wasn't there. No rifle and no pistol, or not one I could see. I took a good look around to see if she'd dropped it. Nothing. Either her partner had it or she had one hidden under her jacket. I paused, wanting to check, but was afraid of rousing her. One last look, then I snatched up the fallen flashlight and ran. 41. I was sure I was heading in the direction Derek told me, so all the security teams should be behind me. But after less than a minute, I heard the tramp of boots again. I dropped and covered my radio. I turned the volume all the way down, even though it had been silent since I'd taken it. I crawled into the nearest patch of brush and lay on my stomach. The footsteps seemed to be going parallel to me, neither approaching nor retreating. Tell me how a full squad of us can lose 4 teenagers in less than 20 acres of woods, a man's voice said. Davidoff is not going to be happy. Another man answered, with any luck, he'll never find out. We've still got an hour before daylight. Plenty of time. How far can they get? They continued walking and talking, their voices and steps receding. When they were gone, I started creeping out, then stopped. If all 4 of us were out here, should I be heading for safety? Or trying to find the others? If you go to that safe spot, where Derek expects you to be, you won't have to worry about finding them. They'll come to you. What if they need my help? You accidentally knocked out one woman and suddenly you're Rambo? It felt cowardly getting myself to safety, but my inner voice had a point. If that's where Derek expected me to be, then I'd better head there and meet him. But I did feel a bit like Rambo, switchblade in one hand, radio in the other, flashlight jammed in my waistband as I stealthily crept through the thick woods. Yeah, as long as you don't trip and impale yourself on your own knife. I closed the blade. Chloe, a female voice whispered. I whirled so fast my foot slid on the soft ground. Tori. I squinted into the night. The woods here were so dark I could only make out shapes that could as easily be trees and bushes as people. My fingers touched the flashlight, but I pulled back and kept looking. Tori. SHHH. This way, hon. The endearment made the hair on my neck rise. Aunt Lauren. SHHH. Follow me. I caught a glimpse of a figure. It was as faint as the voice, and all I could see was a pale shirt glowing ahead. I didn't move. It sounded like Aunt Lauren and the figure was her size, but I couldn't be sure, and I wasn't running after her like a little kid, so desperate to believe that I raced into a trap. I took out my flashlight and clicked it on, but she was darting between trees, and it was impossible to make out more than her shape and shirt. Then she glanced back and I got just a glimpse of a profile, a swing of blonde hair, an imperfect view, but enough for my gut to say that's her. She waved for me to hurry, then veered left into deeper forest. I followed, still cautious, no matter what my gut said. I was jogging past a patch of bushes when a figure lunged out. Before I could spin, it grabbed me, a hand clamping over my mouth, cutting short my yelp. It's me, Derek whispered. He tried pulling me into the bushes, but I resisted. Aunt Lauren, I said. I saw Aunt Lauren. He gave me a look like he must have heard me wrong. My aunt. She's here. I pointed in the direction she'd gone. I was following her. I didn't see anyone. She was wearing a light shirt. She ran past. Chloe, I've been right here. I saw you coming. No one else ran. He stopped short, realizing what he was saying. If I'd seen her and he hadn't. My chest seized. No. It was an illusion, he said quickly. A spell to trap you. My dad's done stuff like that, and, he rubbed his hand over his mouth, then said, firmer, that's what it was. I'd wondered the same thing, but now, hearing it from his mouth, when it should have supported my own doubts, all I could think was, a ghost. I saw Aunt Lauren's ghost. The forest blurred, and his hand on my arm seemed the only thing holding me up. Chloe? It was a spell. It's dark. You didn't get a good look. All true. Totally true. And yet, I shook it off and straightened, pulling from his grasp. When he hesitated, hand out, ready to grab me if I collapsed, I stepped away. I'm fine. So what's the plan? We'll wait here. Footsteps sounded. We pushed into the bushes and crouched. A flashlight beam schemed the trees like a searchlight. I know you kids are back here, a man said. I heard voices. Derek and I stayed still. His shallow breathing hissed at my ear. My back was against him and I could feel the thump of his heart. The flashlight beam kept coming, cutting through the darkness. It passed over our bushes. Then it stopped, came back, and shone full in our faces. Okay, you two. Come out of there. I could only see a veiled figure silhouetted behind the flashlight's glare. Come out, he said again. Derek's breath warmed my ear. When I say run, run. Then, louder, put the gun down and we'll come out. It is down. With the light shining in our eyes and the man hidden behind it, there was no way to know if he was telling the truth. He lifted his free hand and waved it. See, no gun. Now come. The man dropped forward, like he'd been hit from behind. The flashlight tumbled to the ground, beam arcing through the air. Derek shot past me and tackled the man as he started to rise. Simon stepped from the darkness behind the man, hands raised for another knockback spell. Run, Derek said, holding the struggling man. When Simon and I hesitated, he snarled, Run. We took off but kept checking behind. We could hear the sounds of a fight, but it was a short one, and before we'd gone far, Derek was behind us. When we slowed, he thumped us both in the back, telling us to keep moving. The moon through the trees gave us enough light to see where we were going. Tori. I whispered to Simon. We split up. She. Derek motioned us to silence. We ran until we saw the glittering light of houses through the trees and knew we must be approaching the back road. We took another few strides. Then Derek thumped us again, this one a hard whack between the shoulder blades that knocked us off our feet. He landed between us. When we tried to rise, he pushed us back down. Simon lifted his dirt-streaked face and rubbed his jaw. I kinda like my teeth. All of them. Derek shushed him and twisted around to lie on his stomach, facing the other way. We did the same. I followed his gaze as it traveled over the forest, until it stopped and I heard footsteps. Derek tensed, ready to leap up, but they were still a good distance away when they stopped, footsteps replaced by the murmur of voices. The radio in my pocket chirped. I took it out and checked the volume. Simon looked past Derek and mouthed, "Radio," then pointed toward the voices, asking if it was one of theirs. I nodded. "Sweet," he mouthed, then shot me a thumbs up that made me blush. Derek glanced over with a nod and a grunt that I interpreted to mean, "Good job, as long as you didn't do anything stupid to get it." "I found Alpha 1, a man's voice said, so low I had to strain to hear him. Simon motioned for Derek to turn up the volume, but Derek shook his head. He could hear fine, so there was no need to risk it. "Where is he?" a woman's voice answered over the radio. "Knocked out. Looks like he went a couple of rounds with our young werewolf. Get him to safety. Delta Team still has the in-right girl, right?" I shot a look at Derek, but his expression didn't change as he concentrated on listening. "Delta 2 does. I'm not sure how well she'll work as bait, so I sent Delta 1 to get Carson from the truck." That got Derek's attention. Simon mouthed Andrew to me. The voices retreated, but a moment later, the woman's came again over the radio, calling Delta 2. A man answered. "Have you got Carson?" she asked. "I'm almost there." "Good. Your job is to persuade him to call those kids. He's going to lure them in." He won't. I don't expect him to volunteer, the woman snapped, but considering he's in our custody, he'll do what we say. If he refuses, shoot him. Simon's head shot up, his eyes dark with worry. Derek motioned for him to be quiet as we listened. Delta 2 came back on. Did someone move the truck? What? The truck? With Carson. It's not here. The argument that followed was loud enough that Derek put his hands over the radio speaker, muffling it more. They spent the next few minutes making sure Delta 2 had the right spot and that no one else had moved Andrew and the truck. But there was no such simple explanation. Their hostage was gone, with their truck. So Andrew's safe. What about Tori? I asked when the radio went silent. For a moment Derek said nothing, which was better than what I expected. A snapped what about her? As quick as he'd been the other day to say that he didn't care if Tori walked in front of a speeding car, it wasn't so easy to actually stand by, knowing she was in mortal danger. I'll do a sweep, he said. If I find her, great. He didn't say the rest, but I understood. If I don't find her, we have to leave her behind. As bad as that sounded, it was the right thing to do. I didn't want Derek putting himself in a bullet's path for Tori. That was an awful thing to admit. I didn't hate Tori, I didn't even really dislike her anymore. But when it came down to the cold, hard choice of putting a life on the line to save hers, I couldn't do it. Not Derek's, not Simon's, not mine. And that choice was going to haunt me for a very long time. Be careful and, the other words that rose to my lips were be quick, but I couldn't be that callous even to think it shocked me. So I swallowed and repeated, be careful. Derek wasn't leaving, though. We were. He made us set out first, so he could stand watch. When we were safely on our way to the back road, he'd go after Tori. We made it about 20 paces before a figure appeared in our path. Simon's fingers flew up. Simon, it's the man said, ending in an oomph as the spell hit and he fell backward to the ground. Andrew. Simon rushed forward. The man rose, giving a wry smile as he brushed himself off. I see your knockback spell has improved. Andrew wasn't much taller than Simon, but he was squarely built, sturdy, with a broad face and crooked nose. His crew-cut hair was grey, though he wouldn't be any older than my dad, and looked like a retired prize fighter. Not what I expected from that cozy, tidy little house. When he looked at me, his smile faltered, the wrinkle between his brows deepening, like I looked familiar, but he was having trouble placing my face. He started to say something. Then he glanced up sharply. Someone's coming, Andrew said. Simon glanced at the approaching shadow, big but moving silently. It's Derek. No, that's not Andrew began. Derek stepped into the light of the clearing. Andrew looked up at him and blinked. He stared at Derek, like he was trying and failing to find the boy he knew. Behind the surprise in his eyes, there was something sharper, a note of worry, maybe even fear, like in that moment, he saw not his friend's son, but a big, powerful young werewolf. He blinked the fear back, but not before Derek saw it, his gaze shunting to the side, shoulders and jaw tensing, as if to say that was okay, he didn't care. But I knew he did. You've grown. Andrew tried for a smile but couldn't quite find it, and that, for Derek, seemed worse than the fear. He looked away completely, muttering, "Yet." Simon waved at me. "This is. Let me guess. Diane Enright's girl." I shook my head. "Chloe Saunders." "It's the hair," Simon said. "She's blonde, but we had to dye it because Later, Derek said, then looked at Andrew. They have the right girl. Victoria. Andrew frowned. Are you sure? Simon took the radio from me and waved it. Chloe got this from them. We heard about you escaping and them catching Tori. I'll go get her then. You three, get to the truck. He told us where to find it, then started to leave. I'm coming with you, Derek said. I can find her faster than you can. Andrew seemed ready to argue, but one look at Derek told him it was useless, so he took the radio from me and sent us to safety. 42. WE found the truck in old SUV hidden behind a neighboring barn. The door was open. A piece of metal had been jammed into the ignition to hotwire it. Simon was checking that out, trying to see if he could start it up, when three people ran from the woods: Derek, Andrew, and Tori. Simon and I flung open the front doors and climbed into the back. Derek took the passenger seat. Tori sat on my other side in the rear. That was a quick rescue, Simon said as Andrew started the truck. No rescue required, Tori said. I can take care of myself. Derek muttered something about remembering that the next time he risked his life to help her. As Andrew got the truck moving, I asked Tori what happened. She'd been taken captive and held under guard as the others searched. At first, she'd had 2 guards, but when things started going wrong they'd left her with only a single guard. One handy binding spell later, they lost their only remaining prisoner. You think they'd have taken your spells into account? Derek said. Well, they underestimated me, she said. Derek grunted. Simon started asking something, but Andrew shushed us while he drove the truck over a rough field. He kept the lights off and rolled along slowly. Simon shifted beside me, getting comfortable in the cramped back seat. His hand brushed my leg, then found my hand and took it. When he smiled over at me, I smiled back. I expected him to give his usual reassuring squeeze and let go. Instead he seemed to take my smile as a sign of encouragement and entwined his fingers with mine and rested them on my thigh. As tired as I was, my brain reeling with questions, adrenaline still pumping, a little buzz passed through me. Silly, I guess. Making a big deal out of holding hands? So 5th grade. I was sure, for Simon, it was no big deal. While he wasn't the first guy to hold my hand, let's just say my experience with boys didn't go further than that. The buzz passed quickly, though, as we reached the road and Andrew turned on the headlights. He asked if we were all okay, and the first thing out of my mouth was my Aunt Lauren with you? His eyes met mine in the rearview mirror as he frowned. Lauren Fellows. She works for... I know your aunt, Chloe, but, no, she wasn't there. Chloe thought she saw her, Derek said. Simon twisted to face me. What? I saw someone. It sounded like her and it kind of looked like her, from what I could see in the dark. Did you see her? Simon asked Derek. He didn't, I said. And he should have, because she ran right past him. You saw a ghost, Tori said. And you think it was your aunt? More likely a spell, Derek said. They have stuff like that, right, Andrew? Absolutely. Glamour spells and other illusions. If you didn't get a good look, that's probably intentional. Whoever cast it didn't want you studying the illusion too closely. That made sense, but I still couldn't shake the gut feeling that I had seen her. Not Aunt Lauren but her ghost. Simon leaned into my ear and murmured reassurances, saying they wouldn't kill Aunt Lauren, she was too valuable. How's your arm? Derek asked when I stayed quiet too long, lost in my worries. Did you pull your stitches? Simon asked. No, Derek said. A bullet grazed it. A bullet. Andrew steered to the curb and hit the brakes. You were shot. No, no. It's just a scratch. Andrew hesitated, but I assured him and Simon that I was fine, and Derek confirmed that the bullet had only just passed through my shirt, grazing me. Andrew turned back onto the road. We'll get it cleaned up when we stop. I can't believe he shook his head. Hey, I skinned my palm, Tori said. Ground it up pretty bad. You need to check Chloe's stitches, too, Derek said. She got cut with glass a few days ago. They fixed her up, but it should be looked at. Tori waved her injured palm. Anyone? Anyone? She rolled her eyes. Guess not. It looks sore, I said. We should get some iodine on it. She gave a wan smile. I can always count on you, can't I? Guess I know who sent the cavalry back to rescue me. But you said you didn't need rescue, remember? Simon said. It's the thought that counts. We wouldn't have left you there, Victoria. Andrew glanced back at her. Tori, is it? She nodded. He smiled at her. It's good to see you and Simon together. Whoa, no, Simon said. We're not together. Tori agreed, just as emphatically. No, I meant through the mirror. Andrew's gaze went from Simon to Tori. I meant all four of you. I'm glad to see you together. That's one thing Kit and I agreed on, that the group was wrong to keep the subjects separated. So you worked for them, too? I asked. The Edison group. Simon nodded. He got out just before our dad. He looked at Andrew. That's how they knew where to find you, isn't it? When we escaped, they figured we'd come here, so they grabbed you to use as bait. That seems to have been their plan. And, anyway, it was a good excuse for picking me up, something they've wanted to do for years. How come? Tori asked. We'll talk about that later. First, let's find something to eat while you guys tell me what's been going on. The only place we found open was a fast food drive-thru in the next town. I wasn't hungry, but Simon insisted on getting me a milkshake and I sipped it as he explained to Andrew what had happened with us Lyle House, our escape, the compound, the experiment, the deaths of Liz and Brady and Amber. Rachel is still there, Simon said as he finished. Chloe's aunt, too, who's obviously their hostage now, like you were. Unless she's Tori began. Simon's glare shut her up. She's fine. But we need to get them and our dad out. Chloe's aunt doesn't think he was taken by them, but he must have been. I'd have to agree, Andrew said. Nothing in my own searches has suggested any other explanation. Derek looked over sharply. You've been looking for him. For all of you. We drove for almost an hour and passed through only one big town. We were getting farther and farther from New York City. Finally, Andrew turned into a private drive even longer and more winding than his own. Where are we? A safe house for supernaturals. Simon nudged me. Like something out of a movie, hey. Well, it certainly has played that role before, for supernaturals on the run from cabals, Andrew said. Cabals? Tori said. A whole other situation. But this place really serves more as a hostel for visiting members of our group. It was owned by one of our first members, an ancestral estate that he willed to us for the cause. What cause? Tori asked. Monitoring and ultimately disbanding the Edison group. He slowed as the dirt lane turned rough. Or that was our original goal. We started as a band of former Edison Group employees, defectors like me who were concerned about their actions. Not just the Genesis 2 project that is one of our main concerns, but the Edison Group goes far beyond that. Eventually, we were joined by others, who took issue not only with the Edison Group's activities but with those of the cabals and other supernatural organizations. Still, the Edison Group has remained our primary focus, monitoring their activities, conducting small acts of sabotage. Sabotage? Simon said. Cool. Small acts? Our main goal has been on monitoring, to the growing disgust of some of our members, myself included. Was Dad involved? Simon asked. Andrew shook his head. I suppose you know your dad and I had a falling out. Yes. And it was over this group. Your dad always stayed out of it. Too political for him. He'd been willing to help, but otherwise he didn't participate. He thought it would call undue attention to you boys. But I was pressured by the others to bring him in. As the father of 2 subjects from the Edison Group's most ambitious and potentially dangerous project, he'd be the perfect person to help attract powerful new members from the supernatural community. He was furious. All his work to keep you hidden, and now I wanted this. I'll admit, I supported the idea. But I underestimated the danger you faced from the Edison Group. I see that now. He turned another corner, slowing more as the ruts in the road got deeper. After your dad and you 2 disappeared, and we heard rumors the Edison Group had you boys, some of us began arguing for a more active stance. We were convinced you and the other subjects were in danger. Others with more influence insisted that the group wouldn't hurt you. Well, they were wrong, Tori said. Yes, and with your story, we'll have the proof we need to take action. We turned yet another corner and the house appeared. For a moment, all we could do was stare. It was like something out of a Gothic novel, a huge rambling Victorian, 3 stories tall, surrounded by forest. If there were gargoyles up there, shrouded by darkness, I wouldn't be surprised. Cool, Simon said. Now this is where supernaturals should live. Andrew chuckled. And, for the next few days, it's where you're going to live. You can settle in here and rest while we make plans. He glanced back at us as he parked. But don't get too comfortable. I'm about to ask the group to conduct a jailbreak at Edison Group headquarters, and it's been a lot of years since any of us have been there. We're going to need your help. 43. I went to bed and I slept. I wasn't sure I would, with the lingering excitement of the night, my fear over Aunt Lauren, my worries about the surrounding forest, filled with animal corpses waiting to be raised. But for the first time in weeks, we were safe, and that was all the encouragement my exhausted brain and body needed to shut down and bless me with deep, dreamless sleep. I knew this wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. Even the first step persuading the rest of this group to go back wouldn't be as easy as Andrew hoped. And even when it was over, it wouldn't truly be over. Not for me. I was changed. Not just the genetic modification, but me. I was different. The very thought of going home to Dad and our condo and my school and friends made my brain reel. That life was gone now. Maybe I'd go back to it someday, but it would be like replacing an actor with someone who looked, sounded, and even behaved differently. I wouldn't be the same person. I wasn't even sure I could play the role. My old life felt like a dream, a mostly pleasant, uneventful dream. Now I'd awakened from it and realized who I was and what I was, for better or worse. There was no closing my eyes and sliding back into that blissful dream of normal. This was my normal now. The rest of the audiobook will be continued in the next episode. Join us on Patreon for early access or more great audiobooks. A link is provided in the video description.